We welcome a presentation from you on the arts, culture, and tourism sector strategies that have been developed for the Redwood region.
Right, thank you. I will just jump right into it so we can keep rolling on time here. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Rad. Okay, cool. So, yes, so here this report's going to be on the arts, culture, and tourism sector table and the discussions and discoveries that led to our strategies report. Scrolling forwards here. So first off, what is the ACT sector? One of the first things that is important to understand is it's incredibly diverse, right? Because of course we think of artists, but we can also think of culture bearers living throughout the Redwood Coast region. We can think of restaurant owners, service workers, tour guides, graphic designers, advertising agencies, radio, television, print media. When we were trying to do just even a rough estimate of 6-digit NICS codes, we stopped at about 110 and could probably go even further if we'd really dived into it. And it's incredibly diverse, and it's also difficult to sometimes track because of how much of this work can happen off the table, and how much of this is gig work, and how much of this, are part-timers, people who are not considered regular employees. So it's an incredibly diverse, vibrant sector, but also a little hard to get a direct handle on. Let's move forward here. We started with a SWOT analysis of the sector here on the Redwood Coast. I like to really break down the strength into two major things. It's nature and it's our people. And the nature part, I joke about this. I do a lot of following Visit California and their new branding campaign, the beach ball and all that wonderful stuff. All of their campaigns, all of their ads, their TV ads, the first shot is always the San Francisco Gate Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, and the second shot is always the Redwoods. So like those are like the identifying things when people think of like California, right? They're like, oh, Golden Gate Bridge, big red bridge, and then it's a big red tree. So I mean, like we are incredibly like a huge part of the California identity for tourism here on the Redwood Coast. That's incredibly important. And we have like, I mean, the numbers, I mean, the last time I checked, I mean, for example, just to the state parks alone in this region, 740,000 visitors annually. That's just to the state parks. It's a huge driver. And then, of course, down south and like down in Mendocino and, of course, Lake County, we have a lot of wine country that is incredibly vibrant. But also, and incredibly important, part of the arts and culture aspect, too, is we have so many artists and creative people working in this region, right? I have to give like just personal local shout out to the Eureka Street Art Festival, which unfortunately just closed just last year for a while. Maybe it'll be back. I sure hope so. But I mean, the sheer number of murals that now are all over Eureka because of that kind of work happening here, it's really amazing to see just how many artists and culture workers are actively engaged in communities throughout the four-county region and who are incredibly passionate about not only what they do, but also where they live. We love living here. We feel deeply connected and rooted in this place. Those are our major strengths. As far as weaknesses, there are a lot of weaknesses that just have to be owned up to in the ACT sector. One of those, obviously, prevailing low wages. That's a particular issue. Lack of employee safety nets. We don't see a lot of retirement plans, health plans, various employee benefits that are just taken for granted often in other sectors. As noted before, most of the work, a great deal of the work is seasonal and or gig work. And there's also an incredible amount of volatility that happens in the sector because of that. I just had a conversation last night. I actually ran into an old friend of mine who has worked here in Eureka as a restaurant server for 21 years. So it's basically his career, right? But he talks about like a lot of the particular vulnerabilities in the restaurant he most recently works at, where, for example, January through April is just a completely dead space, right? They're like, we have to make all of the rest of the money throughout the rest of the year because January through April, now even pushing into May, no one comes in. So it's there. That's what we're talking about, like that seasonal work, and also ties into that volatility in the industries. And that also like ties into like these issues like prevailing low wages, the lack of employee safety nets, the gig work. It's a challenge, right? Because it's a challenge inherent in the whole sector, right? That, for example, my friend here, he's been working in this business for 21 years as a restaurant server. He's really, really good at it. However, there still is this obstacle to considering these as career pathways, right? It's like restaurant like restaurant servers, for example, just one example in the sector are it's just like, okay, well, that's just maybe something you do while you're in college or whatnot, which is neglecting, it's a narrative that neglects how many people are like, no, actually, I this is what I do for a career. And I've been doing this for a decade, 2 decades. And to be able to provide them the same kind of security nets and the same kind of career pathways, upward mobility that we see in other sectors is a major challenge, I think, that we are presented with. Also, finally, there's just the reality that like there is a significant amount of regional underinvestment. And this is true, I think, of many other sectors as well. But we do struggle in particular with just a number of other resources that are available in other, particularly more metropolitan areas of the state, just aren't as prevalent. This is particularly important in the arts and culture areas, right? Where there is a absolutely enormous gap, particularly in private foundation funding for arts and culture activities between metropolitan areas like San Francisco or LA versus other rural areas of the state, right? It's just it's like if I remember correctly, I'd have to check what the California Arts Council report on that was, but we are functioning at like 3% per capita of the private foundation funding that we see in metropolitan areas. So that's another major issue that we have to deal with. Looking into the opportunities in the sector, I actually want to take two quotes. One quote was actually from the RISE regional plan, part one. And that quote is that the sector has many opportunities, including, among others, museums, theaters, art galleries, cultural events, festivals, concerts, art exhibitions, including traditional arts and indigenous cultural practices, and development of heritage sites. So absolutely, like we have a lot going on in this region. I wanted to include this great shot of the kinetic sculpture race, another local Humboldt shout out, world famous arts event. Also, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about something that has been under development for a while here, and particularly a number of politicians locally are very excited about the Great Redwood Trail, which is a very ambitious project and is certainly tying directly into the outdoor tourism aspects, but also I've been really impressed to see the degree to which they are also attempting to integrate arts and culture into the development, the various developmental stages of the Great Redwood Trail. And also this quote that is actually just from the actual strategies report for the sector, talking about the forward-thinking, passionate, creative individuals who are deeply motivated to contribute to and serve their communities. I just wanted to give a little, this photo here of actually a friend of mine, Joshana, here locally, who's now working a dancer by trade, but now working for the Humboldt County system of libraries and is regularly going out to smaller, isolated communities to have that kind of essentially a much more active bookmobile sort of outreach to the communities we have. We're really off the far beaten path. Places that really struggle to have connection to any kind of connection to the regular resources that more metropolitan areas have. Sector threats. Now, the threats here are rather interesting because many of these actually are somewhat double-edged. For example, starting with COVID recovery and, of course, the risk of future pandemics. Now, for certain areas of the arts, culture, and tourism sector, the COVID recovery was basically just literally lights out. It was like, okay, your industry just doesn't exist anymore. We'll tell you when it comes back. That's something that like that many arts and culture organizations are still struggling with and are still left with like the lingering wounds from that period and sensitivities, structural weaknesses caused by that period. On the other hand, there is a fairly gigantic spike in outdoor and recreation, because, well, people were like, well, what can we do? We can get outside and we can do that. And then we saw some course correction, at least happen here locally in this region as of the last year. So that's, again, like I said, it's double-edged, but it is something that we definitely saw what happened to the sector and the profound effects that had on the sector. And we have to be prepared for future pandemics. We have to be future forwards, thinking towards what may happen in the possibility and running models to look at that in the future. Speaking of which, wildfire is now a consistent and constant threat here in the state of California, and that not only has an outsized effect on communities all over the state, but also particularly can affect outdoor recreation-related tourism. I mean, heck, honestly, even it can affect even arts and culture organizations in certain circumstances. It's not in our region, but for example, regular wildfires have consistently caused economic issues for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival with all their outdoor events and smoke and all of that. It's actually an interesting, just today I was reading an article about Cal Poly having a new partnership with the California Insurance Commissioner, actually, to basically be developing new predictive models for wildfire catastrophes in order to identify in the state where are even safe places to build, where are safe places to be having outdoor recreation related activities, which again is, I think, an important aspect of like what I was talking about, that previous point with pandemics, is that we need to understand that this is just part of our reality. And how do we actively start preparing for these things? So I was very excited to see that development and thinking like, okay, well, that's a connection that we should definitely try and loop ourselves back into. Another one that was identified was increasing adoption of AI, which again is, I mean, and I know the governor's office is particularly like laser focused on AI right now in California, but this is just one of those things that honestly, like, it's hard for me even personally to say like where we're going with this. Who knows? Honestly, AI is still such a completely indeterminate impact, but we know that it's going to have some kind of impact, we think, right? It's certainly going to have some kind of impact, but we're not entirely sure yet. I will say that I think that there can be a tendency to have a lot of doom and gloom when it comes to AI and the creative industries. However, I personally am more in the camp of a number of other artists and creative in the creative industries that think that AI isn't necessarily entirely a disaster for the industries, but rather is just going to necessitate a lot of adaptation, a lot of changing how we do things, and being creatively engaging with new tools, and also making sure that we are engaged in advocacy work with, for example, the governor's office, to make sure that we have the kind of protections and guardrails in place to make sure that these technologies are being integrated into these industries in ways that are sustainable in the long term. Because again, like with these previous points, it's here. We're not going to make it go away. Then finally, the last threat that we were examining is the threat of success. I thought it was actually pretty interesting. Like just after I'd finished the strategies report, that was when all of a sudden in the news, I started seeing all the stories about Barcelona and the protests that were happening in Barcelona, which is where I'd grabbed this screen capture from. And certainly we see all over the globe, Barcelona just being one example, the effects, the potentially incredibly negative effects of extractive tourism, gentrification, essentially tourism and tourism-related industries using the places that they're based in as extractive resources to be extracted, right? And I think that one of the things that was particularly noteworthy was that talking or reading some of the articles that were interviewing people in Barcelona, they were trying to be very careful to say, like, we don't have a problem with tourism. That's not our issue. We just have an issue with tourism that is not respecting us and our communities, right? That it is like we want to welcome visitors, we want to welcome people here, but we want them to treat us with respect. And we want to know that first and foremost, our communities are still built around serving us, the community members, the people who live here, and are not solely myopically focused on serving the tourists, serving the maximum number of tourists for maximum amount of gain. So there is a real challenge here within that threat to say, like, okay, as we look at developing this sector, how do we do it in a way that is sustainable in the long term for the actual communities that are there? I believe that this is a good thing, because I believe good places to live are also good places to visit, and vice versa. So, looking at some of the specific strategies that we saw developing as we were engaged in these table conversations, and we also saw a lot of crossover happening with our fellow sector tables. We broke it down into 3 major areas, with separating out into a number of separate different tactics that we're also looking at. The first one being the importance of regional networking and resource sharing, particularly as we are a very geographically expansive, isolated region. The importance of using whatever we have and sharing whatever we have with our neighbors, and to continue to develop coherent regional-wide plans for advocacy, for regional branding, as well as data collection. We often struggle, honestly, with all 3 of those. Particularly data collection can be a major issue, because like there is a lot of investment that, for example, this is mostly through like the creative industries, but there's been a lot of investment in data collection and studying happening in metropolitan areas, particularly San Francisco and LA, because they're very focused on tracking film and television, or tracking tech, software development, things like that. And when it comes to looking at similar sets of data for rural parts of the state, all of a sudden things become a lot more opaque, and we find ourselves sort of struggling in the dark a lot more. So making sure that we are incorporating and making new systems for regional data collection is very important in this sector. We also looked at training and skill development. Entrepreneurship, I want to underline here at the first point here, because as I noted earlier, one of the major issues and weaknesses in this sector is that there's not much in the way currently, unfortunately, in terms of a career pipeline, right? Often, and so because there's not an easy career pipeline for many people in the sector, the way that they advance their careers is by going into business for themselves. That's often like I mean, for example, heck, I mean, you're a restaurant server for 10 years, and then you decide to start your own restaurant. You work as a river rafting guide for 5, 6 years, and then you decide to start your own river rafting company. Artists all the time, like many artists are all also small business owners. I mean, small business owners of one. So providing more resources to encourage that sort of career development is very, very, very important in this sector. Particularly, I think, in ways to not just think about incubation and just basic business skill training, which is still absolutely important, but also to start thinking about how potential entrepreneurs can be identified and then linked together with potential areas of growth, right? If we look back at data collection, right, if we can be able to say, hey, we see that like these areas are actually like ripe for growth and developmental potential, and then we could actually be able to use that data to inform talking with people who are at that stage of their careers in the sector to say, hey, are you wanting to start your own business? Not only can we give you the skills and the training to help you do that and the support networks to do that, but we also have done the legwork already and done the data collection to try and give you the best possible success, right? Like, we know that these particular areas are ripe for growth. We encourage you to look at those areas first if you're thinking about going into business for yourself. We also are trying to look at ways to create meaningful partnerships with other sectors, including allied healthcare. One of those areas that, for example, that we just have been exploring is the intersection between the need for behavioral health and behavioral health professionals in the region, and the role that arts, culture, and outdoor recreation can have in that. There's, at this point, decades of data showing the positive impacts of arts and culture activities and outdoor recreation activities on mental health, and to start to see how those sorts of connections can be made between different sectors. And then also just, again, looking at other ways we can find different pathways for professional development. For one example, someone from she's actually the center activities, the director of center activities at Cal Poly right now, and she is talking about how so many people in outdoor professionals in outdoor recreation need lots and lots of certifications, right? You need outdoor, like outdoor first aid, wilderness rescue, kayak. Kayaking has like 3 different certifications, on its own. And currently, all of these certifications are offered elsewhere in metropolitan areas, which means that anyone working in these fields in this area has to go out of the area for often these trainings that last 2 weeks or even a month, past that. And she was like, well, gosh, if we could actually be able to invest in having the trainers here who could offer those certifications, then we could become a regional hub for offering those certifications rather than having to have people ship themselves out elsewhere to get those certifications. Because also, not only is it a huge hassle and a huge barrier for people working in outdoor recreation, but there's also a brain drain that occurs through that, because often when people go somewhere else to get these certifications, sometimes they don't come back. Sometimes they're like, oh, okay, I actually see more career opportunities out here. So that's an example of ways in which we can find professional development, which encourages these sectors. And then finally, looking at creative placemaking. Getting back to that idea of a good place to visit is a good place to live, right? And finding and looking at ways of developing these community hubs, which could be cultural centers, which could be vibrant neighborhoods. I think also good examples of community hubs can be tourist attractions. I think an excellent example of a community hub here, which has been very successful in terms of both building community and fueling tourism, is the Skywalk here in Eureka, right? So identifying the existing hubs and also thinking of ways of creating new ones. Also, the other part of the strategy here is to always be emphasizing the quality of life, right? So back to that idea in terms of what we were talking about with threats there, that we have to think about, like, okay, how is all the development happening in this sector improving the quality of life for the people who live here? And then also, finally, there are so many isolated communities in this region. People are living in communities that are hours off of the main artery of the 101 and also the one going up through Mendocino. And it's a tremendous struggle. I mean, I think particularly for young people who are just starting out and trying to get their careers started, or trying to determine whether or not they even want to stay in their communities. I think that it is tremendously difficult to convince young people to stay in these incredibly isolated communities when they feel a sense of desolation, of isolation, when they feel a sense of hopelessness, that they feel like their community is dying slowly. And so I think that particularly in terms of not only making sure that we are creating vibrant and vibrant career opportunities, but that we are also engaging in this economy of hope. Right. This is something. It was a quote from an early part of the Rise report that I really latched onto and gravitated toward. This idea that yes, we need to provide quality jobs for people, and part of that is making sure that people feel like that they really, really do belong here and they have hope with this. I mean, because I think that that's one of those things where, for example, there are a lot of opportunities. I talked to, for example, Sal, who's deeply involved with the state parks, and he described to me once, he's like, I wish young people here, and he lives up in Del Norte County, he said, I wish people here in Del Norte, young people knew how many good career opportunities there are in the state parks. Because he's like, there's a huge number of great career opportunities there. But if people are not feeling a sense of hope in their communities, if they're not feeling a sense of connection to their communities, they will leave before even starting to explore those opportunities. So that's the importance of really looking at this quality of life issues and these quality of life issues that particularly the really truly isolated rural communities are suffering from. Keep moving here since I know time is of the essence. These are some developmental dyads I was working with and developing during the process of writing the strategies report, and as a way of creating essentially 3 sets of dyads that attempted to look at interrelated polarities here. Specifically, the idea of balancing physical infrastructure with knowledge infrastructure, right? To think about like, okay, we can build a new arts center, we can build a new tourist hub, we can build these things, but we also need to constantly be looking at how we are building our knowledge infrastructure, data collection, making sure that we are balancing the physical things that we are building with the actual data sets and awareness of what's happening in our region. Then also tourism and community well-being, right? That those are also in balance. If tourism is looking outwards, right, and being like, hey, look at our amazing place, come visit, come see. Community well-being is a part that looks inward and says, how is everyone doing here? How are our communities doing? How is everyone doing? Do we have people leaving because they feel like they don't have a place here in this community anymore? And both of those have to be in balance, right? And then finally, balancing the need for immediate action with long-term planning. And that's just, I mean, very on the most simplest basis that we are looking at, okay, what are the things that are really at the highest priority that need to be done first and now, right? And certainly this is actually a conversation that I was having with Josh earlier, like a couple months ago, thinking about just how much like the need for better data sets and data collection is a foundational work, right? Like that's something that kind of if you think about like that, this needs to happen first, right? Because this informs so many things come after that. And so that's a way of, again, just organizing things that have to be done first and done fast in order to move forwards while also taking a long-term view of like, okay, what does this look like 10 years in the future, right? Which was certainly part of the requirement for the strategy report, but also like, what does this look like 50 years in the future? What does this start to look like as we are really trying to build a long-term community? I think this is particularly important in these rural areas of the state because there are so many people who live here who like, I'm like a 4th generation, Humboldt resident, or my family's been here forever, or particularly here on the North Coast, my family's been here since time began. So I think that there is a long view that we also need to be taking there as well. And that's was the intention behind the dyads. And finally, I know most reports start with the vision, but I wanted to end with the vision after going through all of that and share the vision here that we, Sabrina and I, finalized in our strategies report, which was that we believe in utilizing the responsive, flexible, and innovative industries of arts, culture, and tourism to stimulate economic activity, create sustainable living conditions within the sector, provide service to our communities, and promote the values of hope, joy, equity, exploration, and creativity, thereby raising the quality of life for everyone. And thank you. That is it.
Well presented there, Calder. I think all of the emoticons are showing us that. Yeah, and so are your dyads there sort of the framework for what to do?
Well, no, like, I would say that the dyads, for me, when I was trying to develop the strategies report, was less of a roadmap and more of a conceptual structure that helped guide me personally in terms of saying like, hey, are we paying enough attention to this? Are we missing something, right? Because I think particularly when you're looking at a region as diverse as our region and a sector as diverse as our sector, it is very easy to go down a particular pathway or down a particular rabbit hole and get lost in the weeds there and lose sight of many other different aspects which are important, right? In fact, actually, I mean, I will fully admit that that's one of the consistent challenges with the work in the sector is that, yeah, people are very passionate, but often very focused on what they do. Artists can start talking about art and they'll be very passionate about art, but like they'll be like, that's what we're focused on. Like, uh, and they're not necessarily as concerned about what a restaurant owner may be concerned about, even though they're all part of this very interconnected, interwoven ecosystem. So the dyads, to me are really again are less of a specific like do this then do that, but it's more of a like, hey, have you remembered to check in on this? Have you remembered to consider quality of life in the community while you're also considering how to boost tourism? Have you been thinking about have you been thinking about this immediate plan? If you have this immediate plan that we're working on right now, have you also thought about what that plan looks like 10, 15, 20 years in the future? Uh, Essentially to bring balance. The specific the slide prior to that, the specific strategies were the areas that we were more where we were trying to more specifically focus on like actionable items, which are also like present in the strategies report in terms of our what was it the 10-year timeline that was asked to be part of the strategies report. It was like, okay, you can do this and then you can do that. As I was mentioning earlier, Sabrina and I's first recommendation in terms of like, okay, the like step one is data collection. In fact, actually, I think as you called it, Josh, in our meeting, which I thought was perfect, like a landscape assessment, like that we need better, more robust, and also more important, perhaps very importantly, consistently updated data sets for the region in the sector. Because it's also very easy to do it one and done and be like, okay, great. But then sometimes you look and I'll be like, gosh, when was this data done? Like, oh, 2005. Great. Okay, so that was 20 years ago. Like, so again,
Right.
that's the problem there.
Seems like there'd be an opportunity, I mean, there, with the tourism boards and the destination marketing orgs to partner, especially if there could be some, maybe public money, and leverage, put that up and they could contribute some that could be sort of a nucleus of funding to get some of that started. And then, maybe working with Cal Polys. I know they have a really great outdoor education program up there and, try to tie it into the university as a anchor for the data side, kind of serve.
No, I'm
But I've
in total agreement with you there, Josh. And I mean, like, yeah, I was invited to participate, and I still participate in actually the Outdoor Recreation Administration Advisory Council there at Cal
okay.
Poly. And yeah, there's some amazingly wonderful professors up there. In fact, actually, I think Lee, like you and I have a meeting with them next week to talk about some federal grant possibilities, or not really grant, but like it's not actually a grant, it's something else. But anyway, uh, but yeah, I definitely agree that Cal Poly is a wonderful anchor for the region in terms of data collection. And I think that like the more we can leverage that, the better.
Anyone else?
Hey, Josh, I just want to acknowledge that
Yeah.
and say congratulations to Calder and his team again. Sabrina, they've they're actually going to still continue to participate and are being brought on as our sector investment coordinators for the arts
Right.
and tourism
Okay.
industry. Yeah. So congratulations to them on an excellent proposal.
Great. Yeah. Well, I think that'll tie in well, kind of just with the update that we're going to provide on how we're thinking about, what we can do. But perhaps before we do that, Susan, do you want to, first of all, is there anything else for Calder? I know there's a lively chat in there, so there's probably some stuff in there for you to look at.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through the chat. I mean, again, there are just so many great points. I mean, in some ways, that's part of the reason I love the work in this sector so much, is that it is so incredibly diverse and open-ended that you're like anytime you're like, oh, I think I got it figured out. You're like, oh, right, now there's also this question. I mean, again, definitely like looking at Susan, your comment about the housing vacation rental struggle. Yes, absolutely. I mean, like I mean, we particularly well, I mean, I was to say particularly here in Humboldt, but also Del Norte's having a lot of the same struggles. I mean,
Yeah.
there has to be not, I mean, like, I think a regional strategy, but honestly, also like a regional strategy which can hopefully work with state strategies for dealing with this issue, because it is a major issue. Like one of the first things we start to see happen during gentrification processes are housing shortages, and we're already struggling with an incredible statewide housing shortage.
Hmm.
So it's one thing is like, oh well, we'll keep expanding the tourism industries, but if we're expanding the tourism industries and vacation rentals are also spiking as a result of that, then we are adding to the problem. We're not fixing anything.
We
So,
also had the reverse of that when we were taking hotels and turning them into housing. And then using the TOT and the places for people to stay. So, I mean, we just need more structures.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of those things where, again, it's like the importance of data collection is not just for me determining what it is that you're supposed to do, which it absolutely is, but it's also creating those data structures and that data collection in place so that you know if what you're doing was working. Because like that's a thing that I see, like as I start to particularly look at a lot of these programs or like some of these things, I realize that that's a constant struggle that, a lot of agencies, particularly on the more small, like regional or municipal level, they struggle with is like, okay, well, we did the program, we developed this program, we did it, but we don't know if it actually, like, well, did it actually do anything to address the problem or what is it? Well, we don't know, actually. We're not sure if it did anything. So like being able to build in like those robust data collection systems and reporting systems in order to be like, hey, like, is this actually having a meaningful effect? What kind of effect is it having? Just exactly what you were saying, Susan. Like, there are so many different ways in which actions taken at different levels can affect this problem. Like, we need to know the numbers of what effects those are having.
I saw that Dana's note about the different ACT coordinators. Like it seems like some kind of ongoing working group activity, almost like these, where you're getting together on a periodic basis to discuss issues and share best practices across the regions would be useful,
Yeah, I sorry, I don't mean to interrupt there, but that is another recommendation that Sabrina and I made in the strategies report, was to basically keep continuing the table work, even if it was with a different set of people and under different auspices, but that particularly this sector needs people from a diverse group of people from a lot of different perspectives need to regularly come together and share their insights and their problems. Yeah, because as noted, otherwise we can become very, very isolated and stuck in our own silos.
Okay, well, knowing that you're going to be continuing on as a sector table coordinator in this arena, people will know where to go when, to have that touch point. And I mean, I know that Susan and colleagues there have been thinking about the long term, how to maintain, brain trust and information hubs from all this work. So I would expect that will be something that we work on making happen. So Susan, do you want to talk about the catalyst process and other points of that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of update you guys on what we know, which is mostly that we don't know a lot in terms of how we're going to handle the disbursement of funds. So part of this project is $9 million in catalyst funds, which North Edge will be paying out and then getting reimbursed by the state. Even on a rotating basis, money goes out and in
Is anyone
60
else having
days, that's
trouble
still a lot of money to be going out at a time to get,
Susan,
Am I
I think
am I back?
yeah, but there you go. Now you're
Suzanne,
back.
you're frozen.
Yeah, now you're good. Now
Maybe go off
you're good.
video, Susan, it'll help.
Oh, good plan.
Oh, sorry, I'm so close. How are you guys?
Good, how are you?
Good, good.
I was like, wait,
Uh-oh.
Have to mute Thomas.
Yeah, mute Thomas.
Okay, so can you hear me okay now?
Thomas, can you mute yourself,
Cheese,
please?
butter, ghee,
The
curd.
host
Take down my
of
shop.
Gail could do it.
Stop, Lolita. Got some ice
Yeah.
cream.
I know I haven't been there yet. I need to go.
We've got a little bit. I mean, Lolita's a long ways. So we got two
Well, I mean,
flavors.
I'm in Fortuna, so.
Thomas is doing the business.
I'm
Abigail,
calling him
do you
now,
call-
you guys. I'm so sorry. Thomas, mute yourself.
There you go.
There you
Okay.
did.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Thomas.
Okay. He's doing the business.
Yes, he
All right.
was.
Okay.
So I just wanted to let you guys know that we're working on this. There are other entities that are also struggling with it, but it's really hard to make very clear plans about what our disbursement is going to be like until we know what the projects are. So, but we are going to have to be really thoughtful, and each contract will probably come with some kind of disbursement plan so that we are pacing how quickly we get the money out. We are also partnering with Humboldt Area Foundation, which gives us some more money, which is very exciting. And now the big question is, the state will not pay for us to do any advance pay to projects, which is a little frustrating because a lot of the people we're working with need the money in advance of paying for things, not afterwards. So we might be able to work with Humboldt Area Foundation to see if they could do an advance pay, and then we'll reimburse the money that they put out. So we are looking for options, and we are also always looking for money. The other thing that we heard yesterday, which I don't even want to say out loud, but we put money in our budget for interest, and that budget was approved. We didn't get any comments on our contract, so it's not nearly enough, because I'm sure we're gonna have to borrow more money than that. And yesterday they were saying they didn't think we could use our grant money for interest. So I'm a little worried about if I do a modification, if they're gonna, then that's gonna stand out. So we're waiting to hear from them on that. I brought this to the Economic Development Working Group because I thought you guys are economic development folks. So if you have a very clever hat and you know of any way that we could access some local money to get it out and get reimbursed, it's just we're trying to be creative, so reach out to me. Does anybody have questions that I can't answer? I'm happy to tell you what I don't know. All right.
It really does depend on the projects that are chosen, and we have really at this point no clue. And our cash flow here at North Edge, so we weren't built to do something like this, and most of the regions are, a lot of them are in the same boat.
So I would expect some systemic solutions to be at least being discussed by the state. And I see that Dan is giving a nod, indicating likely things happening.
Yeah, I do think that it's come up from a lot of people, but they were saying that even if we want to go get an advanced pay from the state, it could take 4 to 6 months.
Right. But I think this actually gets back to some of the fundamental aspects of kind of what we set out discussing in this working group, which was, that the ability to actually get funding and financing, depends in a large part on, the project readiness, and all of the parts that go into establishing that. So I think there's been probably a lot of ideas and a lot of dreams, and certainly the 100+ projects in the inventory indicate that. And it, there's a long way between enthusiastic ideas and real, projects that are going to move the needle. And so I think it really will be then incumbent on the sector table coordinators working with the project proponents, and then eventually, the collaborative to make good decisions, to bring projects that are, as the best projects that are both from an impact perspective and a readiness perspective. And then, hopefully those, the level-headed thinking can prevail to get projects that will have an impact, and go with those, and acknowledge that there may be continuing work needed on ones that aren't quite ready. But that, I think, would be the ongoing work of this whole activity, would be to build the readiness over time.
And also, what I always have to remember too is the short time frame on which we have to not only pick these projects, but fund them. So that's another challenge.
And so just to be clear, I mean, the general model that I'm seeing roll out is RFPs going out from the different regions, and then formal proposals, coming forward. I have seen in one region that I'm tracking where they've sent out sort of a message ahead of time, even before anything officially gets launched, but they're basically framing out what they expect and include a part called a letter of intent, which would sort of be the initial description of the project, which I think then would get filtered through, the steering committees in that case to then invite a subset of projects to go to the next stage. So I think thinking about how to do that, not to exclude projects, but to just try to steer towards good projects, ready projects. Even I think good maybe is not the right word, maybe ready projects, So Kelly, did you have something?
Well, I just thinking is it wouldn't solve the advance funding need that a lot of projects have, but a mechanism that might help with projects is many of our jurisdictions have PI from CDBG in some form, which you can put in for PI applications at any time. and the CDBG likes to see those funds be an assist to other funding. So if we have projects that are need more, or that might be a way to braid funding to bring it forward, and it can be flexible on timing. It's a big ask to go for those CDBG applications for a lot of folks. But if we do have something, Mendocino is sitting on a decent sized pot, so it could be something we could have a conversation around.
Right, interesting. That would have to move quickly, that conversation. Right.
It's an option, but
Yeah.
if you have a lot of people and it's working on it,
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Say, to be continued on that one.
yes, they do struggle to move quickly, but
Yeah, we're familiar with CDBG too, but you said you have money that a pot you're sitting on that you don't need to apply for?
we have a PI fund that we could have discussions around if the right project came up.
EI.
Program income. So this is non-competitive funds. Still has to be used like a regular CDBG program. Same rules and restrictions, but we don't have to compete for the funds.
Yeah.
I could see this being a good resource for the projects that don't make it to Catalyst.
Mhm.
Those options, and then you don't have that timeline either to worry.
Yeah. And a lot of other jurisdictions in the North Coast also have these funds in some
Or
form.
they have access to them and can apply for them if we have especially if you have a project
And
already lined up.
And Thomas, if you want to ever have a chat about CDBG, I can describe it to you. It's complicated and will take time.
Yeah. Okay. See, good discussion here, and I'd say follow up on those points of interest, and it could be. I know this is something that is not going to be solved today, but is important to be thinking about and solving.
The purpose of this group is to have smart people thinking about money problems. So, yeah.
And so, what is the timeline that you're currently working with, Susan, just on the Catalyst RFP process?
On the RFP process, I'm not I think that they're aiming for mid to late October.
So that should be something that's communicated out in the newslettering and stuff so that people are
well advertised. I mean, that's a very big thing. So.
okay. Great. Well, I'm gonna take just a couple of minutes here to briefly describe what our continuing role is going to be, and then welcome any questions on that. Let me try to get this thing set up here. Okay, there. Okay, there. Okay, and there, and there. Yeah, so the first part of our work has wrapped up with our delivery of a phase 1 progress report, which I'm sure Susan can share out for those who would be interested in reviewing what we have done and some of the recommendations. And we have been incorporated into the administrative budget for the catalyst round under a refined scope of work here. And so really what we've set out to do here is really go deeper on the economic development funding and financing, technical assistance with a particular effort to support the sector table coordinators and the projects under those with the project proponents that they are working with to develop funding and financing resources, basically lists and contact information for funding and financing resources by sector table. And then continuing to curate a set of expert sessions, ideally on a monthly basis. And then these general working group meetings on a bi-monthly, which we shifted to at the end of the summer. I think it's going to be interesting to see if we can sustain interest and engagement in this working group. But we hope that we can. And so topics of importance and relevance to you all will be important to hear about. We'll continue with the sector table strategy focuses for the next couple. That will probably get us through the end of the year, and then into the new year, we'll want to just be developing topics that are most relevant to the regional interest. And then we'll have a set of office hours and ability to support projects that are, I would call the priority projects in going after funding. And then I think more generally, as time and budget allow, just be a resource for the region on this topic. Again, really about, identifying and building funding resource databases, facilitating working groups, providing technical assistance and providing that back in reports. These are the tasks that have been outlined in our scope. And where we are. We're going to continue to hold these meetings and record the sessions and post them to the website. We're working with the CCRP team currently on a little smaller side project that will bring map interface for the projects that have been entered into the inventory. And so that'll be a resource and some other pieces that will come along as we go along. And again, this is a 24-month contract. And so we will be continuing to be here over that time period and working with you all. This is kind of our plan phasing with the deep dive on the sector table, funding resources to be in the first phase. And that's how to reach me. So happy to take any questions that you have on that. Or we were talking just about sort of implementation of the sector table focused work. And one of the things that we want to do in the near term is, as the sector table coordinator folks are identified, I know that have all those been done, Lee?
We just sent out notification today.
Great. Okay. So pretty quick, I think we'd be interested in meeting those folks and, letting them know that we're a resource for their efforts. And then we thought we'd kind of do a one at a time approach so that we can learn, and refine our methods over time, but really we want to then meet with each sector table coordinator and get a sense of the resources that they already have in mind, the funding and financing resources or approaches that they know about. And then we would work to identify, areas that we can fill in the gap and structure that information into stuff that we can post on the web or share widely. So that's kind of how we intend to go forward. And we'll continue to, we have the October 2nd is our next expert session. And for that, we have a topic which is, I think it'll be a little bit cross-cutting in some ways, but following from our work last time on the climate finance side, we had a colleague who I had a very successful engagement with while I was serving as the executive officer at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority in Monterey. NHA Advisors, our municipal advisor firm that's in the North Bay that works with public agencies to access, to basically do financings. So bond markets and other complex transactions, they serve as an expert advisor to local governments in that capacity. And they've done literally hundreds of projects throughout mostly Northern California, including the Ukiah streetscape financing. And so Mark reached out because a lot of what they're doing recently has to do with governance and financing approaches to addressing sea level rise and climate change, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area. But, with the activity in the Humboldt Bay and the Noyo Harbor, he would be able to draw just generally on that expertise to help us kind of go a little deeper. It's sort of, if you have an EIFD, how do you then translate that into actually dollars in hand to do projects? That's kind of, the point at which they engage in the process. And in looking at that, we started just talking about the context of the region a little bit more, and the subject of opportunity zones came up. And for those, this is a federal program that was intended to incentivize private sector investment in served census tracts. And it was set up several years ago with some early wins for short-term investors on capital gains tax abatement. The longer-term players, this is kind of the latest. I was tracking this at Fort Ord because there happened to be one opportunity zone on Fort Ord. So we thought that was going to be a big way to attract private sector investment. And it has sort of created its own little industry in the finance world. But I'd kind of lost track of things because there was like some early incentives and then it was like a long-term play. What Mark is telling me is that the long-term play, those are more than 10-year investors, are still looking at opportunity zones as a attractant for their investment. So that all of a sudden became another subject that could be relevant, particularly in those coastal zones. But I know, looking for the map here, there is I think on the GoBiz site, the community data, there's a whole piece on, you can actually see where the zones are. So I thought that would be interesting to put in here. Here we go. Here's the link. Like this is for Humboldt area. But you can zoom out on this map and it kind of goes for the whole state, and you can see that there are these zones in oh, let's see. Okay, yeah, so this is the oh geez. Yeah, opportunity zones. There it is. Okay. Took a while to load on my computer. So like in Humboldt, there's these big areas even to the northeast that you know, Mendocino's got some up in the northeast around Covelo and down around Ukiah. Lake County's got some of these. And so we thought having some discussion on the potential of these opportunity zones to attract private investors could be a useful addition. So we will either have those conversations at the same time during our next expert session, or we will set up a separate one. But I think could be enough overlap that it would make for an interesting hour and a half. And I know Dana has talked about her colleague Brian Coleman, who's the GoBiz OZ rep expert. So if we'll be bringing those forward as subject matter experts. And then we're also open to other topics for the expert sessions. So please be thinking about topics that you would like to hear more about, and we will go about getting those experts and bringing them here.
I was also thinking too, we haven't really done this yet, but these expert sessions are so useful. I'd like to think about who we might want to invite specifically to the next, you know, some city folks that don't normally come, some county folks that don't normally come, so that we can start getting some direct. Yeah.
That occurred to me too, also, especially on this particular one we've just been talking about. I think would be quite useful for all the, you know, all the activity interest on the Bay in particular. You know, you have an EIFD set out there, you have this opportunity zone. It just seems like, you know, with all the interest, it would be smart. So more on that to come. The good news from our perspective is we get to keep doing this work with you all. We hope that you see that as a positive too, and continue to come back to these meetings and work with us and ask us for things that will help you be more successful in your jobs, especially you, Calder. I'm looking at you in your new sector table coordinator hat. But certainly Thomas on the regional meat processing, that's noted. And yeah, I'd say any other questions or comments from the group here? Okay, well, hearing none, put October 2nd, 3:30 on your map, on your calendar, and I think Abigail will send out a calendar invite if we haven't already shortly, and we'll just know that the folks coming have deep expertise, especially for municipal folks and for county and city folks. So I think that would be a good one for them to hear more about. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon, evening.
Thank you as always. This is amazing.
All
Thanks,
right, Tom.
guys.
Take it easy.